May 16, 1940. You could hear President Roosevelt's voice, a bit fuzzy, coming through the radio all over America with big news. He wanted 50,000 airplanes built per year. Back in Berlin, Hermann Göring laughed when he heard about this. Why? Because in 1939, America managed to build only 3,611 military planes. Göring called Roosevelt's plan hysterical propaganda from a crazy leader. The numbers seemed to be on Göring's side. America had just 12 factories that made airplanes. Germany, which had been getting ready for war since 1933, could barely make 10,826 planes in 1939. How could America jump from making 3,600 to 50,000 planes so quickly? Then, a 61-year-old immigrant from Denmark named William Knudsen took a look at those same numbers. His conclusion? It stunned everyone in Washington. He told the president that 50,000 planes wouldn't be enough. What Göring and his people at the Luftwaffe didn't understand was that America was about to use the most powerful tool in World War II. It wasn't a bomb or a tank. It was something much more frightening to any enemy, the assembly line. On that day, May 16, 1940, the White House phone lines went crazy. Roosevelt's radio speech was causing a sensation. In homes all across the country, people couldn't believe what they were hearing. Their president was saying they could build 50,000 military planes in just 1 year. But thousands of miles away in Berlin, Hermann Göring had a very different reaction. He was in his fancy office when he got the news. He threw the report down on his desk and laughed so hard that everyone could hear him. 50,000 planes? He yelled to his staff, his face red. The Americans made only 3,611 planes last year. And now this crazy president thinks he can make 14 times that many in a year? Göring wasn't just joking around. Germany had spent 7 years getting ready for war. They had turned their country into the best airplane-making place in Europe. Even with all that preparation, they only made about 10,826 military planes in 1939. The numbers just didn't add up. America had just 12 airplane factories scattered around, with fewer than 40,000 workers. Germany's Messerschmitt and Henkel factories had twice that many workers. Gentlemen, Göring said, straightening his uniform that was covered with medals, we are seeing the wild dreams of a democracy that's panicking. His idea seemed to make sense. Ernst Udet, who was in charge of the Luftwaffe's technical stuff and was a famous pilot from World War I, agreed. He said that each German plane took 15,000 hours of careful work. Skilled workers fitted every piece by hand. Experts adjusted each engine to be perfect down to tiny measurements. Mr. Reich Marshal, Udet very carefully said, the Americans seem to think they can just stamp out airplanes like they do car parts. They don't understand how important it is to be precise. But on the other side of the world, about 3,000 miles west of Berlin, William Knudsen was looking at those same numbers in a completely different way. He was in his simple office, thinking hard. This 61-year-old who came from Denmark had spent 40 years changing how America made things. He had gone from fixing bikes in Buffalo to being the president of General Motors. When Roosevelt's assistant showed him into the Oval Office that afternoon, Knudsen had a briefcase full of reports. These reports would have shocked Göring's engineers. Bill, Roosevelt said, using his famous charm but also sounding worried, I need you to be honest with me. Can American factories really build 50,000 military planes in a year? Knudsen opened his briefcase and laid out charts on Roosevelt's desk. He did it carefully, just like how he had changed the way cars were made. He looked at the numbers for a few minutes, his old hands touching the columns of information. Finally, he looked up at the president. His blue eyes had seen impossible things become normal. Mr. President, he said quietly, 50,000 isn't enough. Roosevelt was surprised. Even his closest helpers had said that 50,000 was impossible. What do you mean, Bill? Knudsen stood up and walked to the window. He looked out, thinking about what to say. If we're going to fight a war against Germany and Japan at the same time, we're going to need way more than 50,000 planes. I'm thinking we need to make 100,000 planes a year when we're at our best. The president was stunned. 100,000, Bill? That's more planes than the whole world made last year. Knudsen turned back to Roosevelt, looking serious but confident. Mr. President, I've been looking at how we build complicated machines in America. The Germans think we can't make enough planes because we don't have enough skilled workers. They're wrong. It's because they don't have enough imagination. Over the next hour, Knudsen explained his new idea in detail. He knew how to make things in America better than anyone else. The key wasn't to find more skilled workers. It was to not need skilled workers at all. Every B-24 Liberator bomber has 1,550,000 parts, he explained, drawing on Roosevelt's notepad. Right now, Consolidated Aircraft builds each plane like someone building a cathedral a long time ago. Experts fit every piece by hand. It takes them 155,000 hours per plane. Roosevelt leaned in, interested even though he wasn't sure about it. And you think there's a better way? Knudsen nodded strongly. Mr. President, I can break down every one of those 1,550,000 parts into simple pieces that are all the same. Instead of 18 skilled workers spending 8 hours putting on one wing, I can design tools that let 6 regular workers put on wings in 90 minutes. It was an amazing idea. Knudsen wanted to turn America's huge car industry, with its millions of workers and thousands of suppliers, into the biggest airplane-making system in the world. Ford's River Rouge plant had 120,000 workers and could make 8,000 cars every day. Chrysler's tank factory was already showing that car-making methods could build military things. General Motors had a lot of suppliers who could make airplane parts just as well as they made parts for cars. The Germans have spent 7 years building airplane factories, Knudsen said, his voice getting louder. But we have something they don't. The best system in the world for making things quickly. We just need to change it over. Roosevelt sat back, amazed at how big Knudsen's idea was. Turning America's whole car industry around would take more planning than anything anyone had ever tried before. But as Knudsen talked, Roosevelt started to see how powerful America could be if it used its industry to its full potential. The Germans were thinking about how many planes they could make based on old methods. But Knudsen was thinking about changing how making things worked completely. The question wasn't just whether America could build 50,000 planes. It was whether the world was ready for what America could do when it really tried. Outside the Oval Office, Washington was busy with excitement. People were starting to realize what America could do. In cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh, millions of workers were about to find out that they had the power to change the world. Hermann Göring's laughter was going to be a mistake. By July 1940, Knudsen had set up his headquarters in an old warehouse in Detroit. Car engineers were working with airplane designers who were confused by everything. Their desks were covered with plans that questioned everything about how to build complicated machines. The change started with one crazy question. What if bombers could be made as easily as Model T Fords? When Knudsen first said this at a meeting with the board of directors of Consolidated Aircraft, everyone got angry. Planes aren't cars, shouted company president Reuben Fleet, his face turning red. Every piece has to be perfect. You can't make quality quickly, Mr. Knudsen. But Knudsen was ready for this. He showed a huge plan on the table. It was for the Willow Run facility, a factory that would be bigger than anything anyone had ever seen. The main building would be huge, big enough to fit 42 football fields under one roof. The assembly line would be a mile long, with planes moving through 36 different stations in a carefully planned dance of industry. Gentlemen, Knudsen said calmly, looking at the shocked faces around the table, I'm not saying we should forget about quality. I'm saying we should make quality by using careful systems instead of relying on individual skill. The technical problems seemed impossible. Each B-24 Liberator bomber had 330,000 parts, from big wing sections to tiny electrical pieces. Making planes the old way meant that skilled workers had to fit these parts perfectly. Knudsen's idea was to break the plane down into simple parts that could be made separately. Then, they could be put together with exact precision. He wanted to use machines that would hold every part in the right place automatically. This would mean that workers wouldn't have to measure and adjust everything themselves. Even experienced factory owners were surprised by how big the project was. Ford's Willow Run plant would have 70,000 workers, making it bigger than many cities. The factory would use enough electricity to power Detroit, enough steel to build a battleship, and enough aluminum to build 500 fighter planes every month just for the building itself. But the most amazing idea was Knudsen's assembly line. Instead of workers spending weeks putting each bomber together, the plane would move through stations. Teams of 6 workers would put on big parts in 90 minutes, using special machines and tools. Thousands of miles away, German intelligence officers were having trouble understanding the reports they were getting from America. In his office in Berlin, Ernst Udet looked at pictures of the Willow Run factory being built. He was confused. The huge building rising out of the ground in Michigan looked more like a city than a factory. They think they can stamp out airplanes like bottle caps, he told Hermann Göring at their weekly meeting. Americans don't understand that planes need 15,000 hours of careful work. Wings aren't like car parts. Göring nodded, still confident. German plane making was based on methods that had been proven over time. Each Messer Schmidt Bf 109 needed expert metal workers who had trained for years. The factories in Germany made about 1,000 planes a month by paying close attention to engineering and making sure everything was high quality. Let the Americans waste their time on these crazy projects, Göring said. When their badly made planes start falling out of the sky, they'll learn to respect German engineering. But Udet had his doubts. He looked at the technical information that had been leaked from the American factories. The pictures showed machines that were bigger and more advanced than anything they had in Germany. There were huge presses that could stamp out entire wing sections at once. There were machines that could drill hundreds of holes at the same time, more precisely than any German worker could. There were machines that were so complicated that they looked like mechanical orchestras, doing many things at the same time with perfect timing. The boldness of the American approach impressed and worried him. Meanwhile, Knudsen kept pushing forward. He convinced people by showing them what was possible, not just by arguing. At the Chrysler tank factory, he had already proven that car-making methods could build complicated military machines. The factory was making M3 Lee tanks so quickly that even British observers, who really needed the tanks, were impressed. Each tank had almost as many parts as a plane. But Chrysler's assembly lines were making them more efficiently than German tank factories. Workers who had never seen military equipment before were building tanks faster than trained experts. The big breakthrough came when Knudsen's engineers figured out how to redesign the B-24's wing so that it could be made quickly. The old way of making wings needed many skilled workers to fit hundreds of pieces together by hand. Knudsen's new way broke the wing down into just 8 big pieces that could be made separately and then put together quickly. It took 6 workers just 90 minutes. The precision was amazing. Every wing would be almost exactly the same, more consistent than anything that could be made by hand. By September 1941, Willow Run was ready for its first test. The huge assembly line was buzzing with excitement. 70,000 workers were in their places, ready for the moment when American mass production would try to build its first bomber. Knudsen stood in the control room, looking out over the long factory floor. His face didn't show any of the stress he was feeling. Everything he had promised Roosevelt, everything he had risked his reputation on, would be proven or disproven in the next few hours. The first B-24 bomber lumbered out of the Willow Run assembly line at 3:15 p.m. on September 24, 1941. It wasn't pretty, and it didn't look much like the carefully made bombers coming from regular aircraft factories. But it was done, it worked, and it was ready to fight. Most importantly, it proved that Knudsen's crazy idea could actually work. American democracy had just figured out how to make a lot of air power really fast. Critics swooped down on Willow Run like vultures circling a dying animal. By early 1942, newspapers all over the country were making fun of Knudsen's big project with some pretty mean jokes. The Detroit Free Press called it Willow Runaround, and some important people in the airplane business whispered that the Danish guy had finally taken on more than he could handle. Even Charles Lindbergh, the most famous pilot in America, said he wasn't sure if car companies could ever understand how precise you had to be when building warplanes. The problem was obvious to anyone who saw the factory. After 6 months, Willow Run was only making 1 B-24 bomber a day, which wasn't much faster than building them by hand. People in the airplane industry who had been against Knudsen's idea from the start grabbed onto these early problems with barely hidden excitement. "I told you so," airplane company bosses muttered during meetings in Washington, their voices full of professional satisfaction. Reuben Fleet, still annoyed from his argument with Knudsen months before, said publicly that making things in huge numbers just didn't work for military planes because they needed to be so precise. The numbers seemed to agree with him. At 1 bomber per day, it would take Willow Run 137 years to make 50,000 planes. But Knudsen was ready for this. He knew that big changes always seem impossible until they actually happen. While everyone else looked at the daily numbers, he was busy trying to get the production process perfect so it could get better and better. His engineers worked 18-hour days, figuring out where things were getting stuck and breaking down each step of making a plane into smaller, easier steps. Putting on the wings, which used to take 6 people 90 minutes, was split into 12 5-minute stations where special teams could do certain jobs with perfect accuracy. The big change came from paying close attention to what Knudsen called production rhythm. Instead of thinking of each bomber as its own project, he thought of the whole assembly line as one thing working together, where everyone's job was perfectly timed. Studies showed that workers spent 60% of their time walking around, waiting for parts, or talking to each other. Knudsen's answer was amazing. He made special tools that were so precise that regular workers could do complicated jobs without having to measure, think too much, or talk to others. By the middle of 1942, these improvements started to show amazing results. Willow Run's daily production went from 1 bomber to 2, then 3, as workers got better at their jobs and the equipment worked better. Even more important, Knudsen's ways of making things were spreading throughout American factories like a virus. Chrysler was making 100 M4 Sherman tanks every month. General Motors was cranking out airplane engines so fast that German intelligence thought it was just propaganda. Ford's other factories were making Jeeps, airplane parts, and military equipment with a speed that surprised British officers. The numbers were telling a story that Hermann Göring didn't want to believe. American airplane production had jumped from 3,611 military planes in 1939 to 26,277 in 1941. The numbers for 1942 were even more unbelievable, with 47,836 planes coming off American assembly lines, getting close to Roosevelt's goal of 50,000 a year. But these numbers seemed too crazy for German intelligence to accept. Ernst Udet was stuck between the growing evidence and his own professional doubts. German planes flying over American factories confirmed that they were huge, but German engineering said that making things in large numbers meant they couldn't be good quality. No airplane company in history has ever made so many planes, he told Göring with his usual technical accuracy. Either the American numbers are wrong, or they are making planes so badly that they will fall apart in combat. Göring chose to believe the second explanation, partly because he wanted to, but also because he really thought German engineering was better. The Reich's airplane production was doing pretty well using proven methods, with almost 11,000 planes in 1941 and more expected in 1942. German planes were better in combat, shot down more Allied planes, and earned respect from enemy pilots. Quality will always beat crude quantity, Göring said during a meeting with airplane companies in Berlin. Let the Americans fill the skies with their mass-produced junk. Our pilots will sweep them away. But by December 1942, even Göring couldn't ignore what American production was doing to the war. Willow Run alone was making 31 B-24 bombers every month, and the numbers showed it would only get faster. Even more worrying were reports showing similar increases at car factories all over America. Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Los Angeles were turning into huge airplane-making centers, employing millions of workers in organized production. This had a big effect on German leaders. For 3 years, Nazi propaganda had said that American industry was too big, inefficient, and ruined by democracy. They said that the Reich's carefully planned economy was better than Roosevelt's messy arsenal of democracy. But the numbers coming from intelligence sources showed that American democracy was creating industrial power beyond anything anyone had ever imagined. Knudsen, meanwhile, was pushing his ideas even further. His newest idea was continuous flow manufacturing, which meant organizing the entire mile-long assembly line so that materials, workers, and equipment moved together perfectly without stopping. Workers didn't wait for parts or tools anymore. Everything arrived exactly when it was needed. The result was like watching a beautiful machine. 70,000 people working together to turn aluminum and steel into democratic air power. By the end of the year, Willow Run was making 2 complete bombers every day, and the quality was even better than planes built by hand. Test pilots said that the mass-produced B-24s worked just as well as the ones built the old way, but they were more consistent and had fewer problems. The precise tools and automatic processes got rid of human error while keeping the standards needed for combat. Roosevelt's impossible promise was becoming a reality, one bomber at a time. Then disaster struck on a gray February morning in 1943. Test pilot Captain James Morrison climbed into the cockpit of Willow Run bomber number B-24D 427891 for what should have been a normal flight. The bomber had come off Knudsen's assembly line just 48 hours earlier, one of 37 made that month as production sped up to amazing levels. Morrison had flown many B-24s and thought they were reliable, strong planes, even though they were mass-produced. But 6 minutes after taking off from Willow Run's airfield, his voice came over the radio with words that would bother Knudsen for months. "Control, I'm losing hydraulic pressure. The wing is cracking." The bomber crashed 2 miles from the factory, killing Morrison and his 3-man crew instantly. Within hours, Army Air Force investigators were all over the wreckage, taking pictures of every twisted piece of metal. Their first findings sent shock waves through Washington. There was a big structural failure in the left wing, caused by bad welding during production. The leaked report used strong words about poor quality control and shortcuts that hurt the plane's safety. By the end of the week, the scandal was all over the newspapers with headlines that attacked Knudsen's ideas. "Death trap planes from Detroit," screamed the Chicago Tribune. The Washington Post ran a story titled "When Speed Kills," with interviews from airplane industry bosses who had been against production from the beginning. "This is exactly what we warned would happen," Consolidated's Reuben Fleet told reporters, barely hiding his happiness. "You can't keep things precise when you treat complex planes like simple cars." These brave airmen died because someone thought they could stamp out bombers like fenders. Congressional hearings started right away, with senators trying to be the loudest in criticizing Knudsen's program. Senator Burton Wheeler of Montana, already suspicious of Roosevelt's industrial efforts, gave an angry speech that everyone heard. "This administration has sacrificed American lives for the sake of production numbers," he said. "These so-called experts from Detroit have turned our airplane factories into death factories, making bad planes that kill our own pilots before they even see combat." The political damage was quick and harsh. Army officers quietly stopped ordering Willow Run bombers until they could check the quality. Other factories were also being looked at as investigators searched for similar problems. Knudsen's industrial revolution seemed to be falling apart because of one crash and the flood of criticism that came with it. In Berlin, Hermann Göring was happy to hear about the American airplane crisis. "I told my staff this would happen," he bragged during a meeting with Air Force commanders. "Americans think they can mass-produce precision machines like sausages. They have learned a hard lesson about the difference between building toys and building weapons of war." German intelligence officers wrote detailed reports about the Willow Run disaster, saying it proved their ideas about making quality products versus making a lot of products. Ernst Udet, looking at the technical details of the bomber crash, felt like he had been right all along about American production methods. The wing failure matched what German engineers had said about the limits of production. "Making precise airplanes needs master craftsmen who understand metals, stress, and quality control," he told his staff. "You can't reach these standards with assembly line methods designed for simple products." But while critics celebrated and enemies rejoiced, Knudsen responded to the crisis with the same determination that had driven him his whole career. At 63 years old, facing the possible end of his greatest achievement, he worked 18-hour days redesigning Willow Run's quality control procedures with careful attention to detail. Instead of giving up on production, he made it even more precise than building things by hand. The answer came from math, not emotion. Knudsen's engineers discovered that the wing failure was from one welding station where poorly trained workers had used the wrong techniques for 3 days before anyone noticed. Building planes the old way would have caught this problem by checking each part. But production needed quality control that stopped problems from happening, not just finding them later. Knudsen's answer was to create what he called statistical quality control, checking every 100th part with math instead of checking every part. This actually made things more reliable than building them by hand, because it found problems before they could affect many planes. Workers got training on specific steps instead of general skills, getting rid of the mistakes that caused problems in hand-built planes. This crisis took a big toll on Knudsen's health. The stress from the hearings, criticism, and technical problems gave him a mild heart attack in April 1943 that put him in the hospital for 2 weeks. His wife, Martha, begged him to quit his government job and go back to his comfortable job at General Motors. "Bill, you've proven that production works," she said during one of his hospital visits. "Let someone else finish this fight. You've done enough for your country." But lying in his hospital bed, Knudsen remembered what Roosevelt had said during their first meeting. The survival of democracy depended on America's ability to outproduce its enemies. The president had put his faith in a Danish immigrant to change American industry at a time when the free world desperately needed miracles. Despite criticism from Congress and attacks from the media, the basic math of global war was undeniable. Germany and Japan didn't have the resources for large-scale manufacturing, but America was just beginning to show its true potential. Even from his hospital bed, Knudsen kept directing the changes that would prove his methods were right. New ways to check quality were used all over the Willow Run plant. They used stats to catch problems before they could slow things down. Training programs for workers were stepped up so everyone knew their part in keeping the planes safe and sound. Most important, they kept improving the systems that had already boosted production so they could make more planes without sacrificing quality. By May 1943, Willow Run was back to making planes at full speed, using Knudsen's improved methods. The bombers that came off the line were tested more thoroughly than any planes had ever been tested before. Every plane was put through tests that were tougher than actual combat. Critics were waiting for more failures to back up their claims against mass production, but the quality numbers told a different story. The proof came quietly on June 15, 1943, when AB-24 rolled off the Willow Run line and passed every test perfectly. The stats showed that the bomber was built to even tighter measurements than planes made by hand. Everything worked perfectly during tests on the ground, and test pilots said it flew just like planes made the old way. By the end of the month, Willow Run was making one perfect bomber every day, and then two. Knudsen's changes had turned regular manufacturing into something truly special. The critics who had slammed mass production during the crisis in February went silent when the numbers became too clear to ignore. By September 1943, Willow Run alone was making 5 B-24s every day, and each one passed quality checks that were tougher than what the military required. The bombers worked perfectly in combat over Europe, with better reliability than planes made by traditional methods. Congressional investigators quietly dropped their plans for more hearings as people stopped complaining about quality and started demanding faster production to support American troops overseas. But the real impact of Knudsen's Industrial Revolution became clear when statisticians put together the national production numbers for 1943. American aircraft manufacturing had reached 85,898 military planes per year, almost twice President Roosevelt's seemingly impossible goal of 50,000. Willow Run contributed 8,685 B-24s to this total. But the auto industry had been converted into dozens of similar facilities that were making fighters, transports, trainers, and bombers with the same level of efficiency. In Detroit, the massive Ford River Rouge complex had become an aircraft engine factory, making Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engines so fast that it shocked military officials. The factory was making 1,200 engines per month, each one built with the same care as engines assembled by hand. Chrysler's tank plant was making 500 M4 Sherman tanks every month, while also making aircraft parts, anti-aircraft guns, and military vehicles on other assembly lines. The rapid growth continued throughout 1944 as Knudsen's methods were fully put into action. By March, Willow Run was making 24 complete bombers every day, working around the clock with amazing precision. The mile-long assembly line had been turned into a carefully planned operation where 70,000 workers moved together in perfect time, turning raw materials into finished aircraft with incredible efficiency. Studies showed that it now took just 18 hours to assemble a B-24 from start to finish, compared to the 155,000 worker hours needed for traditional methods. The peak came in July 1944 when Willow Run set a production record that was hard to believe. One complete B-24 bomber rolled off the line every 55 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The numbers were amazing. Workers knew their jobs so well that the whole plant ran like a giant clock, with everyone's actions timed perfectly. Quality stayed high as production sped up, with control procedures catching any potential problems before they could affect the plane's reliability. Total American aircraft production for 1944 reached 96,270 military planes, almost twice Roosevelt's original goal, and more than the entire world had ever produced in a single year. The converted auto industry was creating air power so fast that it changed the course of the war. American bomber formations over Europe grew from a few dozen planes to hundreds, then thousands, as mass production provided huge numbers of planes to overwhelm enemy defenses. In Berlin, the numbers from American production finally hit home with the German leaders. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister and the most talented industrial organizer in the Reich, reviewed intelligence reports with growing dread. Germany's total aircraft production from 1939 through 1945 would barely exceed 94,000 planes. America had built more than that in 1944 alone, and production was still growing. Ernst Udet, the Luftwaffe's technical chief, who had dismissed American capabilities as fantasy, now faced facts that shattered every assumption about industrial warfare. German aircraft factories, despite years of preparation and top priority, could never make more than 40,000 planes per year. The Reich's entire manufacturing capacity was smaller than individual American facilities like Willow Run. They have turned their entire continent into a single aircraft factory, he reported to increasingly desperate Nazi leaders. Hermann Göring, who had laughed at Roosevelt's promise of 50,000 aircraft in 1940, now saw intelligence estimates suggesting that American production might reach 120,000 military planes per year by 1945. The psychological impact was devastating for a leader whose confidence had rested on the idea of German technical superiority. During one particularly tense meeting with Hitler, Göring reportedly admitted, "The Americans have something we thought was impossible. They have turned aircraft production into automobile production, but with aircraft precision." Meanwhile, Knudsen kept improving his methods with the same determination that he had shown throughout his career. The lessons from Willow Run were being used all over American industry, creating manufacturing abilities that redefined what free societies could achieve when properly organized. Ford's other factories were making jeeps, tanks, aircraft engines, and military equipment with similar efficiency. General Motors was making everything from aircraft propellers to submarine engines. Chrysler had become a diverse military supplier, making armor, aircraft, and weapon systems at the same time. The human side was still key to Knudsen's industrial philosophy. Even though his methods were systematic, the workers at Willow Run took great in their role as democracy's arsenal, knowing that their precision and dedication directly supported American forces fighting evil around the world. Many were women who had never seen a plane before Pearl Harbor, but had mastered complex assembly procedures through focused training and well-designed jobs. Their productivity was higher than anything achieved by traditional skilled craftsmen, evidence that societies with freedom can unlock amazing abilities by letting regular people do extraordinary things. By the end of the year, American aircraft production had established a commanding lead that made the outcome of the war inevitable. The United States was making more military aircraft every month than Germany and Japan combined could make in a year. Roosevelt's impossible promise had become the foundation for victory, achieved through the vision of a Danish immigrant who understood that the biggest weapon democracy had was its ability to organize regular people for extraordinary achievements. William Knudsen had proven that systematic mass production could achieve both high quantity and high quality at the same time, turning American industry into the force that would decide the outcome of the global fight.